Nobody at the base ever called her by her rank. They called her Ghost, not because she was cold or distant or hard to reach, but because she had a way of appearing exactly when she was needed and disappearing before anyone could properly thank her. Captain Norah Voss had spent 14 years in military aviation doing the one thing most people in her position never learned how to do. She stayed quiet. In meetings, in briefings, in the chaos of a crowded operations room, she listened more than she spoke. Her commanding officers sometimes mistook her silence for hesitation. Her fellow pilots sometimes mistook it for arrogance. They were all wrong. Norah Voss was simply a woman who understood that words, used carelessly, could cost lives. So she saved hers for when they mattered. And if you think this is just another story about a brave pilot, stay with me. Because what Norah did on the night of October 14th had nothing to do with bravery in the way we usually mean the word. It had everything to do with a choice made in absolute darkness, without orders, without backup, and without a single guarantee that she would ever come home. This is the story they quietly buried in a classified report. This is the story her family never knew. Until now, the mission had gone wrong before it ever officially began. 12 Navy SEALs, the best of the best, men who had trained for scenarios most people could not imagine, were pinned down in a narrow ravine in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. Their extraction helicopter had been shot out of the sky 40 minutes into the operation. Their communication equipment was partially destroyed. They had 2 wounded, 1 critical, and no way out that did not run directly through a line of enemy fighters who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Back at base, the operations team was scrambling. Every available asset had been redirected to a separate emergency 40 miles east. The window for a ground rescue was closing. The word nobody wanted to say out loud was already forming in the room. Abandoned. Norah had not been scheduled to fly that night. She had finished her rotation 6 hours earlier, filed her reports, eaten a cold dinner alone in the mess hall, and was reading in her bunk when the alert frequency crackled through the base-wide system. She heard the coordinates. She heard the silence that followed, the specific kind of silence that meant no one was moving fast enough. She put down her book. She laced up her boots. She walked to the flight line without telling anyone where she was going or what she intended to do, because she already knew that if she asked permission, someone would tell her no. She pulled her aircraft, a modified A-10, Thunderbolt, an old machine by modern standards, the kind of plane that newer pilots sometimes laughed at, out of its hangar and ran through her pre-flight checks alone in the dark. The A-10 was not a rescue aircraft. It had no seats for passengers, no extraction capability, no medical bay. What it had was something far more valuable that night. It was loud, it was armored, it was terrifying from the ground, and Norah Voss knew every inch of it the way a surgeon knows a scalpel. She had 412 hours in that specific aircraft. She had landed it with 1 engine. She had brought it home with a hydraulic failure and a shattered canopy at 30,000 feet. She and that plane had an understanding. She was airborne before the tower finished asking her what she was doing. What happened in the ravine over the next 22 minutes has been reconstructed from the testimonies of 11 of the 12 SEALs who survived. Norah arrived overhead with no communication link to the men on the ground. Their radios were too damaged, and no way to tell them she was there except through the aircraft itself, so she used it. She made low passes, precise and deliberate, each one designed to draw enemy fire away from the ravine and toward open terrain where it could unreach the men below. She flew so low on the 3rd pass that the SEALs said they could see the rivets on the underside of her wings. She used her gun, the A-10's famous cannon, capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute, with a restraint and accuracy that the after-action analysts would later describe in their careful military language as extraordinary. She did not silence the threat immediately. She managed it. She herded it. She bought time the way a shepherd moves a flock, with patience, with positioning, with an almost instinctive understanding of the space. On the 19th minute, a ground convoy that had been rerouted from the Eastern Emergency broke through to the ravine. The SEALs were loaded. The critical casualty, a young sergeant from South Carolina named Aaron Briggs, was stabilized on the vehicle floor by 2 of his teammates and survived the night. All 12 men made it out. Norah landed 40 minutes later, alone in the dark, with 3 bullet holes in the fuselage of her aircraft and a left aileron that was barely responding. She taxied to the hangar, shut down the engine, and sat in the cockpit for a long time before climbing out. When the ground crew found her, she was sitting on the tarmac with her back against the landing gear helmet in her lap, looking up at the sky the way people look at something they came very close to losing. She did not say much. She never did. The classified report gave her a commendation in language so dry it barely reflected what had occurred. The SEALs knew better. Sergeant Aaron Briggs, once he was well enough, wrote her a letter. She kept it folded in her flight jacket for the rest of her career, close to her chest, every single time she flew. If someone in your life shows up quietly, without fanfare, without needing to be asked, hold them close. Share this story with them tonight. Because the people who save us rarely announce themselves. They simply appear when the silence gets too loud and they do what needs to be done.